Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a big one, the whole idea of basic human rights. We've got some excerpts from a text that really make you think, and I'm excited to dig into all of this with you.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's important to be talking about, even though I feel like everyone's heard the phrase basic human rights. Sometimes I think we forget what they actually mean.
That's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. What do these rights actually mean for people all over the world, and how do they even come about in the first place? And the part I'm really curious about is how AI is changing the game, maybe for better or worse, who knows?
It's a good question. I think a good place to start would be with like a basic definition. What even are basic human rights? The text we're looking at emphasizes that they're inherent, inalienable, and universal.
So basically, it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from or even what you believe. You've got these rights just because you're human. You can't lose them, and they apply to everyone equally. That's pretty powerful stuff when you really think about it. But I'll be honest, it all still feels kind of abstract. How do these rights actually play out in people's lives?
Well, the text actually breaks this whole big idea down into 5 main principles: universality, inalienability, indivisibility, interdependence, and equality and non-discrimination.
Yeah.
And those principles, those are what help us understand how these rights actually work in the real world.
All right, I'm all for breaking things down. Let's start with universality. What does that even mean practically?
Okay, so universality means that things like geographic borders, cultural differences, political systems, they don't really matter when it comes to human rights. It's about acknowledging that every human being has inherent dignity and worth, no matter what their circumstances are. Think of it this way. It's like gravity. No matter where you go on Earth, gravity is going to work the same way. And it's kind of like that with human rights. They apply to everyone, everywhere.
So human rights are like gravity for morality, basically. They keep us grounded in a shared set of values that we all have, even if we're different. I like that. That's a good analogy. Okay, so let's move on to inalienability. That's a big word. What's the takeaway for our listener here?
Inalienability basically means that these rights, they can't be earned or taken away from you. They're just a part of what it means to be human. It's kind of like you can't just decide to stop being human. These rights are a part of who we are no matter what.
So no one can take those rights away? You can't even give them up yourself if you wanted to? They're just fundamentally yours.
Gotcha. Makes sense. What about indivisibility, though? How does that fit into all of this?
Okay, so indivisibility emphasizes that all those different human rights, they're all connected, and they're all equally important. You can't just pick and choose which ones you like or think are important, because they all work together. It's like, for example, the right to education might be totally essential for you to actually use your right to free speech. You know what I mean?
So it's like a Jenga tower. You pull out one block and the whole thing might fall apart. Each of those rights supports the other rights, and they're all crucial for having a stable and fair society. Okay, what about interdependence? How does that principle build on what we've been talking about? Interdependence, that just reinforces the idea that all these rights, they rely on each other to actually mean something. You can't really have true freedom of speech if you're living in poverty and you don't have access to education, right? These rights, they all work together to create a framework for people to actually live well.
So it's not enough to have just one or two rights. You need the whole package for them to actually make a difference in your life because they all work together. Okay, last but not least, equality and non-discrimination. What's the most important message here?
Basically, this principle is all about making sure that every single person is entitled to these rights, and there's no difference or distinction made between anyone. And that means that we need to work against the injustices and inequalities that have historically prevented certain groups from enjoying those rights.
So we're not just talking about protecting individuals, but we're talking about making a system where everyone actually has equal opportunity to do well in life, no matter where they come from. It's like building a society where everyone has a fair chance to succeed. But how do all of these principles actually work in real life?
Well, that's where those examples in the text are really important. Those show us how those ideas actually play out.
Perfect. Let's jump into those examples then. What's the first one that we should talk about?
Let's start with right to life, liberty, and security of person. That one's a super important part of a lot of legal systems and international agreements.
Okay, that one sounds pretty basic. What does it actually mean, though?
It basically means that you're protected from things like being arrested for no reason, from torture, and from extrajudicial killings. It's about making sure you're safe and protected from violence, no matter where you are in the world.
So it's about making sure everyone's safe and protecting their basic dignity. But how does that work for, say, someone who's living in a country that's torn apart by war versus an elderly person who lives in a care facility? Those are pretty different situations.
Yeah, you're right. The context is definitely important. But the main idea is the same. In a war zone, that right might mean protecting civilians from armed groups. For that elderly person, it might mean making sure they're treated well and protected from abuse or neglect. And the text actually uses those specific examples to show how the right applies in different situations.
So it's about creating a safety net that protects everyone from violence and harm, no matter what their situation is. I can see how these principles start to really mean something when we see them in action. What other important examples does the text give?
Another super important one is freedom from discrimination. That's all about dealing with the inequalities that have prevented certain groups of people from fully enjoying their human rights.
That one's really important for so many people around the world. What are some real-life examples of what that right looks like in action?
Think about having equal access to things like jobs, housing, and public services. It means you have the same chances as everyone else, regardless of things like your gender, age, ethnicity, religion, or disability. It's about making things fair and creating a world where everyone has a fair shot no matter what.
So it's not just about protecting people from prejudice, but it's about changing the system itself so that everyone has the same opportunities. That's huge. All right, what's next on our list of examples?
The right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. That one's a big one, all about individual freedom and being able to believe in what you choose.
So we're talking about freedom of religion, but also being able to not believe in any religion at all, right?
Exactly. This right means that you can practice whatever religion you want or have no religion at all without being persecuted or discriminated against. And that's especially important in societies where people have lots of different beliefs and worldviews.
So it's about making sure that everyone can live according to their own conscience and beliefs without being punished or ostracized. It makes me think about all those times in history when people were persecuted for their religious beliefs.
Yeah, you're right to bring up history. This right came from those struggles, which led to things like secular states and protection for religious minorities. It shows how far we've come and how important it is to keep protecting these freedoms.
It's a powerful example of how human rights actually evolve over time in response to what happens in the world and how societies change. Okay, what's the next example we should talk about?
How about right to freedom of opinion and expression? That one feels especially relevant today, don't you think?
Absolutely. It seems like every day there's another argument about free speech and censorship. What does this right actually mean for us?
It means we can express ourselves freely, whether it's through speaking, writing, art, or even just accessing information without being censored. This right is essential for any democracy to work because it allows for open dialogue, debate, and the free flow of ideas.
The text gives some examples, like criticizing government policies, expressing yourself through art, and getting information without being censored. It's about making sure that different voices can be heard and that no one is silenced for saying what they think, even if their views aren't popular.
Exactly. And it also protects people who speak out against wrongdoing, like whistleblowers, and journalists who report on things that those in power might not want people to know. Historically, things like the printing press and people constantly fighting for free speech have been really important in expanding this right.
It's pretty amazing how technology has shaped the way we think about this right and how we're still dealing with these same questions in the digital age. Okay, let's move on. What's next on our list?
Let's talk about the right to education. It's a fundamental right that empowers people and makes society stronger overall.
I think pretty much everyone agrees that education is important, but why is it considered a basic human right?
It's a human right because everyone should have access to good quality education, no matter what their background is, at all levels of education. That's essential for people to grow, have economic opportunities, and participate in society in a meaningful way. It's all about removing the barriers that stop people from reaching their full potential.
So it's not just about learning facts. It's about giving people the knowledge and skills they need to make good decisions, achieve their goals, and contribute to their communities.
Exactly. And when you look back historically, the creation of public education systems was a huge step towards creating equal opportunities for everyone, instead of education just being for the elite.
It's another example of how human rights have changed to address those inequalities and make the world a fairer place for everyone. Okay, what's the next right we should dive into? Okay, so this next one seems pretty obvious, but I have a feeling it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. What about the right to health?
Yeah, it might seem pretty straightforward on the surface, But it's about way more than just going to see a doctor when you're sick. This right is all about having access to essential healthcare services. The whole package: preventive care, treatment for illnesses, and even rehabilitation.
So it's about making sure that everyone has the chance to be healthy and productive, not just reacting when things go wrong. The text emphasizes how important that is for individuals, but also for the whole society.
Right, exactly. When people are healthy, the whole population is more productive and resilient. Historically, public health programs like making sanitation better, vaccination campaigns, and all the advancements in medical technology have been really important in giving more people access to healthcare. But we still got a long way to go when it comes to achieving true health equity all over the world.
It really makes you think about all the things that can affect someone's health, things like having access to clean water, nutritious food, and living in a safe environment. It's all connected. Okay, let's move on to the next right. How about the right to an adequate standard of living?
This one goes beyond just surviving. It's about making sure everyone can live with dignity. It's focused on having access to those basic necessities like food, water, housing, and clothing. But it also includes things like social security and having opportunities to improve your economic situation.
Yeah, the text really stresses that dignity aspect, the idea that everyone deserves to live in a way that meets their basic needs and lets them fully participate in society.
Right. And historically, things like social welfare programs, economic development initiatives, and fair labor practices have all aimed to improve people's living standards and address poverty. But making sure everyone has a decent standard of living is still a huge global challenge, especially with things like economic inequality and climate change, making everything even more complicated.
It reminds us that progress doesn't always happen in a straight line, and we always need to adapt how we're doing things to address those challenges as they change. Okay, what's next on our list? This one sounds kind of nice.
All right, let's talk about the right to rest and leisure. It might sound like it's just about relaxing, but it actually plays a really important role in protecting workers from exploitation and burnout.
So it's about more than just taking a vacation. What are some of the key things this right covers?
It's about setting those reasonable limits on how many hours people work, making sure they get paid holidays, and protecting workers from unsafe or exploitative working conditions. The text highlights how important this is for everyone's well-being, so people can recharge, do things they enjoy, and spend time with people they care about.
And historically, it was the Industrial Revolution and the labor movements that really pushed for this right. When you think about those horrible factory conditions and the fight for fair labor practices, it makes you appreciate how far we've come.
Absolutely. Workers were demanding reasonable hours, safe working conditions, and time for rest and leisure. It's a good reminder that these rights were hard-won. They reflect all the struggles of people who came before us. It's a legacy that we have to keep upholding.
Okay, last but not least, we've got government regulations and favors. How does this one tie into all the things we've been talking about?
Well, this one's all about making sure governments are doing things in a way that protects everyone's rights, not just the rights of a few people. It's about having fair regulations, things like environmental protection, food safety standards, worker safety regulations, the things that benefit everyone.
So it's about making a level playing field and ensuring that everyone benefits from those protections, not just the people in power.
Exactly. The text also points out that government favors, things like subsidies, contracts, or permits, those should be given out based on who needs them, not based on political connections. It's about preventing corruption and making sure things are fair.
That makes me think about how important transparency and accountability are in government. If those systems are weak, it's really easy for these rights to be ignored or violated.
You're right. History is full of examples of corrupt governments and those small groups of people with all the power who denied basic rights to everyone else. That led to a lot of injustice and inequality. Transparency and accountability, those are essential to make sure everyone's rights are protected and upheld.
It's about creating a system where the power that the government has is used to serve the people and protect their rights, not to take advantage of them or control them. Wow, we've covered a ton of ground here. From those basic principles of human rights to all these real-world examples, it's clear that these rights are super important. But there's one more thing I really want to talk about: AI. I mean, it's everywhere these days, but where does it fit into this whole conversation about human rights?
That's a question that a lot of people are trying to figure out. AI has the potential to be a really powerful tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It really depends on how we develop it and how we use it. The source we're looking at actually suggests that we could use AI to create a whole system that reflects human rights, almost like a global watchdog that's constantly monitoring and protecting those rights.
That's a really cool idea. Just imagine a system that could analyze what's happening in real time, figure out if human rights are being violated, and then alert the public or the authorities.
You would need to be able to access a massive amount of data, things like reports of violations, legal documents, news articles, social media activity, and it would need really sophisticated algorithms to process and understand all of that information. It'd be a huge undertaking, but the potential benefits are enormous.
So AI could be used to keep an eye on human rights situations all over the world, identify potential violations, and maybe even prevent them from happening. It's like having a global guardian angel looking out for everyone.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. AI could also play a big role in helping people learn about their human rights. Imagine having AI-powered chatbots that could answer people's questions about their rights, give them legal resources, or translate important documents into different languages.
It would be like putting all of that knowledge right into people's hands, no matter where they are or what language they speak. It could empower people to understand their rights and stand up for themselves more effectively. What other ways could we use AI to support and protect human rights?
Well, think about data analysis. AI systems can analyze tons of data to find patterns that might point to human rights violations. For example, we could use AI to monitor social media for hate speech, or to identify discriminatory practices in things like housing or employment.
So it would be like having a superpowered detective working behind the scenes, spotting those warning signs that we might miss otherwise.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding problems. AI could also help us find solutions. For instance, AI algorithms could help us figure out the best way to distribute aid to refugees, making sure that those resources get to the people who need them most.
Okay, so we've got AI monitoring, predicting, educating, and even helping to solve problems related to human rights. It's amazing to think about what we could do with it, but, and I have to ask this, are there any concerns about using AI this way? I mean, AI isn't perfect, and we've all heard those scary stories about robots taking over the world.
You're right to be cautious. AI is a powerful tool, and like any tool, it can be misused. There are definitely some potential risks and challenges that we need to think about. For example, if we train AI systems on biased data, those systems might just perpetuate those biases and lead to discrimination.
So if an AI system is being used to make decisions about who gets a loan, for example, and it's trained on data that reflects existing racial or gender biases, it could end up discriminating against certain groups of people.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to make sure that those AI systems are developed and used ethically. We need safeguards in place to prevent those unintended consequences from happening.
Okay, so bias is definitely a concern. What other potential issues do we need to consider?
Yeah, it seems like there's this really tricky balance between using AI the right way to protect human rights and then, maybe accidentally creating a world where AI is actually being used to control people and take away those same rights.
It's a really important thing to be thinking about. One of the biggest concerns is privacy. All these AI-powered surveillance technologies are getting more and more sophisticated, and if we're not careful about how we use them, they could really undermine people's right to privacy.
I can imagine a world where there are facial recognition cameras everywhere, watching every move you make, or algorithms that are constantly analyzing everything you do online just to try to predict your behavior. It's kind of creepy when you think about it. Yeah, it's a tough balance for sure. We know these technologies can be used for good things, like using facial recognition to catch criminals or find missing people. But if they're used everywhere without any real thought, they could create a surveillance state where people constantly feel like they're being watched and their freedom is being taken away.
It's like that thing you always see in science fiction, where a tool that's supposed to protect us ends up being used to control us instead.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have really clear rules and safeguards about how we use these technologies. We need to make sure they're being used ethically and responsibly with proper oversight and accountability. We can't just assume technology will always be used for good. We have to be really proactive about shaping how it's developed and used so it actually aligns with our values.
Okay, so bias and privacy, those are two big concerns. What other potential risks do we need to be thinking about with AI?
Another huge one is accountability. If an AI system makes a decision that hurts someone or violates their rights, who's to blame? Is it the person who wrote the algorithm?
Right.
The company that's using it? Or is it the AI itself?
That's a really tough question. It's not like we can put an AI system on trial, right?
Right. We need to figure out how to assign responsibility for these things in this new world where AI is becoming so powerful. Maybe we need to create new laws or change the laws we already have to address these unique challenges that AI brings up.
It feels like we're in completely new territory here.
We are, in many ways. And it's going to take everyone working together, the people who create this technology, the policymakers, the legal experts, the ethicists, even just the public, to figure out how to deal with these issues the right way. We need to have those tough conversations now and make sure that we're developing AI in a way that benefits everyone.
This whole deep dive has been so insightful. We've explored all those fundamental principles of human rights, seen how they actually work in the real world, and we even tackled those super complex questions about AI. It's pretty clear that this is only going to become more important as time goes on.
I totally agree. As AI keeps becoming more and more a part of our lives, it's more important than ever to be having these conversations right now to make sure it's used to support human rights and not take them away.
It's like that saying, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We can't just sit back and assume those rights will always be protected. We all need to stay informed, stay engaged, and be ready to speak out if we see those rights being threatened.
That's exactly right. And we need to be thinking really critically about how AI is being developed and used. We need to ask those tough questions, demand transparency, and hold the people in power accountable for what they're doing.
Sanal Ab, being an informed citizen and making sure your voice is heard. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone listening with one final thought. Thinking about everything we've talked about today, how do you think AI will shape the future of human rights? What role do you think you can play in making sure AI is used for good? It's something to really think about as we move forward in this crazy new world. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
This is DigitView.